with myself and Ranking Member Mayor and holding this important hearing. We're here this afternoon to discuss Operation Allies. Welcome, the effort led by the Department of Homeland Security to resettle Afghan evacuees and ensure that they have the support necessary to build their new lives here in America. We know that this transition will not be easy, and to leave one's home and resettle a new country is a difficult undertaking no matter what the reasons are. And unfortunately, many of our Afghan allies have faced hardship long before arriving in the United States. The federal government evacuated thousands of our allies and brought them to America for a safer and more prosperous life, but that is hardly where our obligation ends. And we now face the much greater challenge of finding communities where these evacuees can build new lives and provide them with ongoing support. This means ensuring that our allies will have access to long-term housing, employment, as well as access to basic human needs like healthcare, food, and clothing. And thankfully, Americans across the country are welcoming Afghan evacuees into their cities and communities with open arms. This should come as no surprise, since it's a long-held American tradition to welcome those who are looking for a better life. And it is a tradition that makes us stronger as a nation. And I've had the opportunity to observe firsthand how refugees can bring new life and new opportunities to America as well. My district is home to the largest community of Vietnamese Americans, many of whom resettled in Southern California after the Vietnam War. They have built a home in the United States and enriched our society, contributing to the creation of a more diverse and prosperous community. And I have no doubt that our Afghan allies will also do the same in the cities they decide to settle in. We're fortunate to have seen incredible outpouring of support, including from our veterans, faith leaders, and Afghan American community members. While the Department of Homeland Security seeks to provide support and coordination services for these organizations, it is civil society that has stepped up to deliver the local and long-term care for our Afghan evacuees. And I'm pleased to welcome today representatives from 4 non-governmental organizations that are working directly with the government to ensure that our Afghan allies have access to those services and care. This month, evacuees began moving out of the temporary housing at military bases around the country and into local communities that have welcomed them. But many, of course, are still waiting to see where the new homes will be. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses how we can best support Afghans during this critical period and what additional support we may provide from DHS and other federal partners to ensure this transition is smooth. And I think all of us can agree that we owe it to our Afghan allies to get it right the first time. With that, I thank you again for joining us today. And the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee Oversight, Management, and Accountability, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Mayor, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important joint subcommittee hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us in this discussion. We are gathered here after months of extreme turbulence for America and its allies following the U.S. military's drawdown and then the full withdrawal from Afghanistan that concluded at the end of August 2021. As a veteran of the Iraq War and later a conflicts analyst who served in Afghanistan with the humanitarian aid community from late 2013 to early 2015, this is a very personal subject, as I know it is to many in the room. As the veterans community saw what was happening, I think we all felt a sense of heartbreak and rage looking at the images coming out of Afghanistan in August after the swift takeover by the Taliban and complete collapse of the Afghan government and security forces. I was one of the many Americans receiving desperate emails, calls, texts, WhatsApp messages from friends in Afghanistan seeking aid and assistance. This is a personal issue, as I said, and I appreciate how personal it is for some of the other members and witnesses here today, and again, deeply grateful for everyone's participation. Despite repeated calls and warnings from a bipartisan group of lawmakers dating back to April, the administration failed to adequately plan for this withdrawal and was not prepared to protect our Afghan allies who put their lives on the line to help the United States. In the final weeks of August, the U.S. military, State Department personnel, and others on the ground completed incredible work under impossible circumstances, saving countless lives in the process and helping over 120,000 individuals leave Hamid Karzai International Airport. This group included Americans, U.S. lawful permanent residents, special immigrant visa holders, interpreters, and other Afghan allies fearful of what a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan would mean. Tragically, given the unimaginable conditions on the ground and the fact that the country had been ceded to the Taliban, this effort cost the lives of 13 brave U.S. service members and scores of Afghans frantically trying to reach safety. Policy decisions made here in D.C. put our folks in this dangerous position, but every American should take pride in the heroism that those on the ground displayed in our final days, and every American should likewise demand accountability from officials whose decision put them in a position that required those very heroic acts. My thoughts and prayers remain with those who lost loved ones and for those who were left behind in the chaos of the withdrawal. And I hope today we can discuss ideas to make sure every at-risk individual who served alongside U.S. forces, supported the U.S. mission, or otherwise put their lives on the line for our mission is accounted for. With the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan having now concluded, we have largely shifted that mission from evacuating Afghan allies to resettling them. The United States has an ongoing moral obligation to evacuate Afghan allies left behind, and at the same time, ensure the resettlement of individuals who have already been evacuated is completed in a safe, secure, and humane manner. Operation Allies Welcome is a whole-of-government effort led by DHS in coordination with DoD, the State Department, Health and Human Services, and other federal partners to provide resources, immigration processing, medical services, transportation, temporary housing, and a variety of other essential services to the evacuated Afghan population in the U.S. I know from firsthand experience what an incredibly complex undertaking this is. Prior to serving in Congress, I worked alongside Team Rubicon and volunteered with them, which is a veteran-based, non-governmental organization focusing on disaster response efforts both in the U.S. and abroad. And I'm very grateful and thrilled to see them represented here today. While working with Team Rubicon, I witnessed firsthand the communities around the world that struggled with a variety of crises, and our work focused on helping those communities build back following a natural disaster. We provided vital support and exceptional subject matter expertise in disaster situations, oftentimes working hand in glove with governments around the world as well as other NGO and private sector organizations. Now Team Rubicon and other NGOs are teaming up with the U.S. government to facilitate the successful resettlement of Afghan evacuees through Operation Allied Welcome. Their work encompasses a wide range of activities, from providing food and transportation to coordinating with the local communities where evacuees will be resettled to help them find housing and employment. The work that NGOs are currently conducting on behalf of Afghan nationals in the U.S. and around the world is key not only to Operation Allies Welcome, but to the successful integration of these evacuees into their new communities. These organizations are filling gaps in the capabilities of our own government during this undertaking, and we have a lot to learn, and I'm grateful to be having this hearing here today. I'm also excited to hear how the groups are working with the federal government during this historic resettlement effort so that we can better understand the challenges, how operations are going, what we need to anticipate moving forward, and also how we can help. The evacuees arriving in the United States had already been through so much prior to their arrival, so we owe it to them to ensure the resettlement is better planned and better executed than the evacuation was. I was proud to join a bipartisan group of my colleagues in introducing the Welcome Act in September to provide evacuees admitted to the U.S. under humanitarian parole with the standard refugee benefits that are provided to others. And I was pleased to see this language signed into law as part of the government funding measure that passed Congress at the end of September. But there is more we need to know, and there's more that we need to do. And that is the purpose of this hearing. We know this will be a long-term, large-scale operation, and as members of Congress, we are here to listen, to learn, and to help in this effort. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for holding this hearing, and thank you to Chairwoman Barragan and Ranking Member Higgins for leading this important hearing with us today. I'm sincerely looking forward to hearing the witnesses' testimony and ensuring the government is leveraging the full range of NGOs and their capabilities to make Operation Allied Welcome a welcome success.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And I know this is a personal issue for you, and I'm glad you're part of this oversight because it is so important to you. And of course, thank you as well for your service to our country. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Border Security, in operations, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Barragan, for an opening statement. Ms. Barragan.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd also like to begin by thanking everyone for joining us today. I'd like to thank Chairman Correa and Ranking Member Meyer for working with Ranking Member Higgins and me to have this important and timely hearing. During this hearing, we will hear from diverse voices on the ground who are working alongside the Department of Homeland Security to welcome and resettle our Afghan partners through Operation Allies Welcome. As we've heard, DHS is tasked with leading the coordination of resettling thousands of Afghans who worked alongside our military and diplomats, as well as particularly vulnerable Afghans such as journalists, human rights workers, and women activists. However, this resettlement mission requires a whole of community approach. Multiple federal agencies, resettlement organizations, and non-governmental organizations are working with communities and companies like Airbnb day and night to welcome new arrivals into American communities. Resettlement agencies like the International Rescue Commission quickly operationalized to provide services and humanitarian assistance to Afghans being brought into the United States, particularly to those housed on military bases. Civil society groups like Women for Afghan Women are working to ensure the services administered to new arrivals meet the needs of this population while being culturally appropriate. Afghan American-led organizations like Women for Afghan Women are particularly critical during this time. Many of their volunteers encompass deep knowledge of Afghan customs and languages needed to serve this population. NGOs like Human Rights First have been leading voices and strong advocates in efforts to evacuate, welcome, and properly support the resettlement of vulnerable Afghans here in the United States. Veterans and veteran service organizations, including organizations composed mostly of veterans like Team Rubicon, have been stepping forward and galvanizing communities to help our Afghan allies resettle and rebuild here in the United States. Each witness represented here holds a unique perspective and is vital to our discussion. Operation Allies Welcome is well underway, with evacuees being resettled across the United States. Communities nationwide, like the ones that I represent in California, are preparing to embrace these families. Supporting those who risked their lives to help our troops over the last 2 decades, along with those fleeing persecution in dangerous conditions, is the right thing to do. That is why I am proud that Congress passed a continuing resolution which allows evacuees to receive refugee benefits like temporary housing, employment training, and medical care. These benefits are critical to meet immediate and long-term needs. The continuing resolution also includes additional funding for federal agencies working to resettle our Afghan partners. For example, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services received additional funding to process special immigrant visa and humanitarian parole applications. Other agencies receive funding to augment medical support and humanitarian assistance. As Operational Allies Welcome progresses, Congress must continue to work with both federal and non-federal partners to meet the needs of the evacuees and advance this resettlement mission. I am eager to hear from the witnesses on the needs of the Afghan evacuees and how the department can improve services and coordination efforts under Operation Allies Welcome. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Barragan. Now the chair recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Border Security, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for an opening statement. Welcome, sir.
I thank my friend, the chairman and chairwoman, for holding this very important joint hearing today. I'd also like to thank our witnesses for being here to join today's discussions. It's been 2 months since the United States' chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. On August the 29th, President Biden directed the Department of Homeland Security, who we have yet to hear from in a hearing format, to lead the implementation of the ongoing efforts across the federal government to support and resettle Afghans who were evacuated. The disastrous withdrawal led to thousands of vulnerable Afghans coming to the United States under various authorities, such as the the SIV, the Special Immigrant Visas, and humanitarian parole programs. Some of these individuals are being paroled into the interior of the United States, or they're even prematurely leaving military bases before undergoing proper and necessary vetting. The Committee on Homeland Security Republicans have received very little information from the Biden administration on how these efforts are progressing. It's shameful, in my opinion, that only now has the majority decided to hold a hearing on Afghanistan, and I'm requesting respectfully that the committee hold a full committee hearing with relevant government witnesses on the entire resettlement process, including the screening and vetting of Afghans into the United States. As part of our congressional oversight authority, the committee must address the fallout, including any national security threats due to the manner in which the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. Additionally, the committee must also address the screening and vetting process for all Afghans leaving Kabul during the chaotic last days. The committee Republicans have yet to receive answers to many questions we put to the Department of Homeland Security, despite numerous letters and attempts, dozens and dozens. I want to be clear that we're very appreciative of the hard work of the nonprofits and to all the organizations here today that have stepped forward in this hour of need to help all vulnerable Afghans who worked alongside American military forces and our government at great risk to themselves and their families. We recognize the importance of your work, and in Operation Allies Welcome, helping with the resettlement efforts, coordinating donations and logistics support, just to name a few of your contributions. We're very grateful. I look forward to the witnesses' testimony. I thank them for appearing before us today. But before I yield back the balance of my time, I again request a full committee hearing on Afghanistan. Mr. Chairman, respectfully to your leadership, sir, I yield back.
Thank the ranking member, Mr. Higgins, for his comments, and members are now reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. And without objection, members not on the subcommittee will be permitted to sit and question the witnesses. And now I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Michael Breen. Mr. Breen is president and CEO of Human Rights, one of the nation's leading human rights advocacy organizations. He's also an Army veteran. Thank you for your service to our country, sir, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. After leaving the military, Mr. Breen served in the office of the White House Counsel and co-founded the International Refugee Assistance Project, working with refugee families from Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Our second witness, Ms. Robin Dunn Marcos, served as Senior Director of Resettlement, Asylum, Integration Programs for the International Rescue Committee, or IRC. She oversees a staff of over 400 that are providing Afghan evacuees with required processing for onward travel to their final destinations. And the IRC is running the Assurance Program, which matches Afghan evacuees with resettlement agencies. And our third witness, Ms. Nadine Samadi Bakram, serves as the U.S. County Director for Women for Afghan Women, a grassroots civil society organization dedicated to protecting and promoting the rights of disenfranchised Afghan women and girls. Over the past 20 years, Women for Afghan Women has provided life-changing services, education, and training for its clients across Afghanistan and the United States. A native of Afghanistan, Ms. Bakram and her family migrated to Pakistan after her mother was killed in an explosion. She moved to the United States in 2006. And our final witness will be introduced by our ranking member, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our final witness is Art Delacruz, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Team Rubicon. As I mentioned earlier, a veteran-based disaster response organization to leverage those veteran skill sets as first responders to help disaster victims at home and abroad suffering from both environmental and man-made disasters. The organization also promotes service and camaraderie to help veterans gain community, a sense of purpose, and identity to promote transition to civilian life. Mr. De La Cruz served honorably for over 22 years in the United States Navy and enjoyed a career that included a broad range of assignments. He commanded a Navy strike fighter squadron, spent a year with McKinsey and Company as a Secretary of Defense corporate fellow, serving as a Top Gun instructor as well, and made 6 combat deployments. After retiring, he spent 2.5 years in the aerospace and defense sectors in the roles of business development, strategy, and planning. We are excited to have him here today and are grateful for his participation in this hearing. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. De La Cruz, thank you for your service to our country as well. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted to the record. And now I ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Breen. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Higgins, Chairman Correa, Ranking Member Mayer, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on Operation Allies Welcome and the resettlement of vulnerable Afghans in our communities. Human Rights First is an independent, nonprofit organization that for more than 4 decades has pressed the United States to take a leading role in promoting and defending human rights. And today we are at the forefront of the effort to bring to safety Afghans who are in danger following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. After President Biden announced that he would order the complete withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan by September of this year, Human Rights First and our partners established the Evacuate Our Allies Coalition, comprised of trusted human rights, religious, and refugee organizations who work alongside veterans and frontline civilians to advocate for the evacuation of at-risk Afghan allies to safety. We immediately recognized the need to protect the allies who fought alongside the U.S. military in Afghanistan and other Afghans at risk of persecution by the Taliban. Through the spring and summer of 2021, we advocated for a plan to evacuate the United States territory all persons who qualified for the Special Immigrant Visa Program, estimated at around 80,000 individuals, similar to past evacuations of Vietnamese, Iraqis, and Kosovars following conflicts in their countries. We were encouraged in late July to see late-stage applicants of the Special Immigrant Visa Program brought to Fort Lee in Virginia, and hoped the arrival would continue, increasing through the remainder of the year. But with the withdrawal of U.S. military forces and the Afghan government's fall to the Taliban, those hopes were dashed. We nonetheless continue to advocate for evacuation, welcome and support for the resettlement of vulnerable Afghans. With the arrival of tens of thousands of Afghans to the United States and many more still abroad, we quickly established Project Afghan Legal Assistance, or PALA, to support their access to legal counsel. Through PALA and our leadership of the EUA Coalition, Human Rights First is spearheading a collaboration between U.S. legal organizations, law firms, resettlement agencies, and other stakeholders to provide legal representation to Afghan refugees. Through PALA, we've recruited hundreds of volunteer attorneys and interpreters to assist Afghans with their immigration needs. We also work with the coalition and federal agencies to identify legal challenges to their protection and identify works. Our aim is to help secure legal representation for all Afghan refugees arriving in the United States, and we will continue to mobilize the pro bono community to meet that challenge. Thousands of at-risk Afghans remain stranded in Afghanistan or third countries, and they need a clear and viable pathway for reaching safety in the United States. Many have filed humanitarian parole applications with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, yet we've heard that less than a handful of those have been adjudicated. Families have paid sizable filing fees only to have their applications sit at USCIS with no information on when or if they will be reunited with their loved ones. How we welcome these Afghans is as important as the legal frameworks that make up our immigration laws, and Congress can do its part to honor the sacrifices many of these Afghans made by our side by following these recommendations. First, urge the Biden administration to release a plan to evacuate allies and at-risk Afghans seeking to leave Afghanistan and bring those located in host countries swiftly to safety in the United States. Second, create a categorical parole program for Afghan nationals that prioritizes and expedites the thousands of humanitarian parole requests filed by vulnerable Afghans abroad and waive all application fees associated with applications filed by at-risk Afghans. Third, enhance access to legal counsel for Afghans being brought to safety by ensuring, including through oversight of DHS, that Afghans at the 8 safe havens across the U.S. have full access to legal orientations, the ability to consult and meet with legal counsel to better prepare themselves for what's required of them in the U.S. immigration system, and unlimited access to attorneys for case preparation. And finally, pass a bipartisan Afghan Adjustment Act, which would allow Afghan parolees to have an opportunity to seek permanent residence. They deserve an opportunity to rebuild their lives and contribute to our communities without the fear and limitations associated with uncertain immigration status. As a veteran of the war in Afghanistan, I can tell you that veterans and others who served understand the moral obligation to not only evacuate our allies to the U.S., but also to welcome them into our country and our communities. This is a matter of honor, but it is much more. It's an insight into the soul of this country. Many Americans owe their lives to our Afghan allies. We have a duty to honor their service and our commitments by creating pathways to their resettlement in the United States. As a leader of a human rights organization, and together with many thousands of my fellow veterans, I ask you to join in our commitment to seeing our allies evacuated to safety, welcoming Afghans as our neighbors and our friends, and helping integrate into our communities the thousands of Afghans who've already been evacuated to the United States. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and I recognize Ms. Marcos to summarize her statements for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Barragan and Ranking Member Higgins, Chairman Correa and Ranking Member Meyer, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on Operation Allies Welcome and the resettlement of Afghans in the United States. My name is Robin Dunn Marcos, and I'm the Senior Director for Resettlement and Asylum and Integration Programming at the International Rescue Committee. The IRC helps people whose lives and livelihoods have been shattered by conflict and disaster to survive, recover, and regain control of their future. Since late July 2021, the IRC, at the invitation of the U.S. government, has been working to welcome, process, and eventually resettle tens of thousands of at-risk Afghans. I have led a team to quickly stand up services on the 8 safe havens established at U.S. government facilities across the country, and I personally served at 5 of those locations. I'm overseeing a staff of over 400 employees to register and process Afghan guests for onward travel to their final destinations, to coordinate interpretation services and volunteer management, and to support government partners to complete medical checks and other immigration processing steps, among other activities. Today, across the 8 government facilities, we are supporting the reception and processing of over 60,000 Afghan guests, and the IRC alone is expected to sponsor over 10,000 Afghans across our network of resettlement offices this year. As operations have turned from a short emergency response to a longer-term effort, the needs of guests have and will continue to change. The IRC has strived to incorporate its full breadth of humanitarian expertise in areas such as prevention and response to gender-based violence, child protection, and psychosocial support for refugees. As with any rapid humanitarian response, challenges have arisen. We have found the U.S. government to be a willing partner in addressing these problems and working towards sustainable solutions. Some challenges, however, require the intervention of Congress. First, it is critical that Congress pass legislation to ensure Afghans are able to simply and quickly adjust to lawful permanent residence. Most Afghans arriving in the U.S. are entering under humanitarian parole, which will only permit them to remain in the U.S. for up to 2 years, and which does not offer a pathway to lawful permanent resident status. Second, we urge Congress to demand the Biden administration create a categorical humanitarian parole program for, at minimum, U.S.-affiliated Afghans who remain in Afghanistan or who have fled to third countries. Third, we urge Congress to mandate reforms to the Afghan Priority 2 resettlement program to increase applicant access, expand eligibility, streamline processes, and improve communications across applicants, referring organizations, and U.S. government program administrators. Finally, Congress should also ensure Afghan parolees have access to affordable and efficient legal services. Given the temporary nature of parole and the complexity of immigration law, Afghan parolees must receive legal screenings to understand their options and pursue permanent status and protection as eligible. There are also measures the Department of Homeland Security can take immediately to improve the ongoing evacuation, processing, and resettlement of Afghans. DHS should work in close coordination with the IRC, other resettlement agencies, and the State Department to facilitate smooth transitions from the government facilities to final destinations in the true spirit of a public-private partnership. The urgency of moving guests off the government facilities expeditiously has to be measured against the pace of departures and the capacity of receiving communities. For the IRC, involvement in this domestic emergency response is unprecedented. It is truly a historic operation in terms of size, scope, and complexity. Each of the guests has their own harrowing story of escape and are thankful to the U.S. for bringing them to safety. One of IRC's staff members from our Atlanta office, himself a previous SIV recipient, went back to Kabul to help his wife and children evacuate. He struggled to exit the country, but was finally evacuated to Germany. After a month delay, he and his family just arrived at one of the safe havens in Virginia, and he is anxiously waiting for them to complete processing so he can take them home. When asked how it felt to be back in the U.S., he replied, "The feelings cannot be expressed. You do not know how much love I have for this soil." In this unique and urgent moment, we beckon the U.S. government, including the Department of Homeland Security, to engage with the IRC and its other partners in a fully open, transparent, and collaborative fashion. Thank you for your time and holding a hearing on this important topic. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Marcos, for your testimony, and I now recognize Ms. Bahram to summarize her statement in 5 minutes. Welcome.
Dear subcommittee members, thank you so much for this opportunity today. My name is Naeed Samadi Bahram. I am the U.S. Country Director at Women for Afghan Women, the largest women's rights organization globally, with over 1,200 staff working on the ground in Afghanistan. Women for Afghan Women is based in New York and started its operation from New York. We have been supporting Afghans and other immigrant communities through social, educational, and legal services. We appreciate the launch of Operation Allies Welcome, which is an incredibly important initiative to safely resettle Afghans in the United States. Women for Afghan Women and the Afghan community at large are very appreciative of the resources and effort that have been made through so far. Some positive feedbacks I have been hearing from the community includes the committee being available and connecting the members of our community to governmental departments and organizing listening sessions, where a lot of the questions that were unknown have been answered. The Afghan community and our allies have been also instrumental for this, providing refugees with the assistance that they are needing. Community members are donating essential items, fundraising, settling apartments, and ready to welcome our Afghan neighbors in our communities. We are eager to work with the Refugee Resettlement Organization to provide the culturally and linguistically competent services. Through our observation with the resettlement efforts, these last several weeks, we have 3 key recommendations we hope to collaborate on. The first one, we strongly want the involvement of Afghans in this process, in decision-making, as well as partners with the refugee resettlement organizations. As many of us already and have the expertise on this issue, many of us have been refugees and have been through this process ourselves. We also want to let everybody know that there are large group of Afghans with their expertise available to help, but unfortunately not being called on. We want the Operation Allies to partner with Afghans on any of these decision-makings in resettlement. For example, initially, a group of unaccompanied Afghan minors were sent to one of the agencies where there was no Dari or Pashto language services. We heard the children were speaking to the parents, and the parents tried to speak English, and once they couldn't, they tried to speak in Spanish. We know Spanish is not the language spoken in Afghanistan. Our second recommendation is to assess and evaluate the conditions present in the bases where Afghan refugees are waiting to be processed. I myself visited one yesterday, and I think I was lucky to visit the best one. But I have heard so much from the community and people that I know in the base. Some example of that is, I had a friend whose family are in one of the bases. Her sister got her period and was not able to receive a pad for over 24 hours after asking multiple times. Another family, who is a pregnant woman, said after standing for hours in a line for food, will not get enough portion for her and her baby to be fed. She started losing weight, and therefore her husband has been sharing his portion of food with her. The other thing that I observed yesterday in one of the bases was there's a lot of unknown, and people are really worried about how long they will be staying on the bases. Last but not the least is during these periods that we are resettling, we do understand it's a challenging period and we have thousands of people here, but we also want to add that organizations like us are ready to work, and Afghans around the country are all ready to work. I do not want to take more time, and I want to appreciate this opportunity to testify in front of all of you, and thank you for your time, consideration, and support of the Afghan people. It's very personal to me, and I really appreciate the outpouring love that we have been getting from all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baccaran, for your testimony, and I'd like to recognize Mr. De La Cruz to summarize your statements in 5 minutes. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Correa, Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Meyer, Ranking Member Higgins, and members of the subcommittees. I'm Art De La Cruz, the CEO of Team Rubicon, and I'd like to thank you for convening this forum. So Team Rubicon is a national disaster response organization that mobilizes military veterans and civilians to help communities prepare, respond, and recover from natural disasters and humanitarian crises. Founded in 2010, we've grown from 8 volunteers to 150,000. And these men and women, the majority who are military veterans, deploy at a moment's notice to address unmet needs in communities across the country following floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, fires, and the same internationally. From Hurricane Sandy to Hurricane Ida, from tornadoes in Moore, Oklahoma to Kansas, to derechos in Iowa, in international responses in the Philippines, Haiti, Mozambique. Team Rubicon is a humanitarian organization that seeks, with support, to alleviate human suffering and provide a safer, more stable tomorrow. We are committed to serving people who need us in times of emergency, and our men and women will not turn away. We respond to all phases of the disaster cycle, from mitigation efforts to lessen the impacts of wildfires, to helping homeowners get back into safe homes after disasters. And Team Rubicon has conducted almost 1,000 operations since our founding in 2010. Our volunteers are called Gray Shirts. They serve in other capacities to meet any disaster, to include recently the pandemic, specifically with COVID-19. We define a disaster as anything that overwhelms a local community, and since March of 2020, in over 300 communities, we've managed to help in efforts with food banks, setting up testing sites, facilitating financial aid, COVID field hospitals, and medical services in places like the Navajo Nation. And we do this while simultaneously addressing disaster response and rebuild of houses, which is core to our mission, to include being in Louisiana since the record 2020 season. In December 2020, we added vaccine distribution. We've worked closely with similar agencies we've seen with FEMA and the Veterans Administration to manage fixed and mobile sites, and we've created a coalition of veterans, and we are proud to say we've achieved 1.6 million vaccinations in 105 cities. I'll take this moment to emphasize that the majority of our volunteers are military veterans who work alongside first responders and all sorts of civilians from every background. They bring unique skills and experience to the forefront in the execution of this mission, and I'm joined by people from all of these backgrounds, and they, coupled with military specialties, bring success. We train, we have a penchant to continue to serve that makes these services possible. These men and women who come from all of our service, I like to think that they have unique schooling. It's not just the service, it's what they learn, it's their skills, it's their experience, it's classes in leadership, decisiveness, resource management, ingenuity, and training that make our mission possible. As you know, it is no surprise that veterans continuing to serve after they take off their uniform is a legacy that we should all be proud of. Regarding the Afghan resettlement, as the nation watched the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the subsequent evacuations and associated efforts, the veteran bias for action again prompted our organization and many others into action. To be clear, it is not my intent or an area of expertise to discuss withdrawal operations or efforts. Rather, I would like to take this time to point out that Team Rubicon, like many organizations, was founded post 9/11, and many of our volunteer veterans deployed to Afghanistan and forged strong and lasting relationships. They had complex emotions during the withdrawal, like many veterans across the country, and our volunteers were eager to assist in the resettling. Images of men, women, and children on C-17s as they took off served as catalysts for action. It is time to do something, and they asked, what is the next mission at hand? How can our organization help? Collaboration happened quickly. Team Rubicon was asked to consider potential roles our volunteers could serve with. We met with organizations, the State Department, FEMA, Department of Defense leadership from VOADs across the country, and base leadership. Ultimately, Team Rubicon decided we could have impact by managing donations. It wasn't a core mission of our men and women. We were gonna figure it out. We were gonna build the technology to do it, and we did so. For context, after the suicide bombing, these men, women, and children often left with nothing but the clothes on their back. That drove the urgency for meeting their immediate needs. From clothing to shoes, toiletries, diapers, and baby formula, all of this had to be a priority. With no clear mechanism, process, or authority, we collaborated and we began to figure this out to quickly pivot to solve this in our space. We were initially asked to support 2 bases with donated goods management. It quickly grew to 7 bases, along with the management of shipments to Holloman Air Force Base. We began our operations on August 30, 2021, under the guidance of the Defense Coordinating Officers, and we continued at Fort McCoy, Camp Atterbury, Joint Base McGuire, Donna Ana Range, Quantico, Fort Pickett, Fort Lee, and Fort Bliss. It's also important to note that communities across the country rallied. Places like the Twin Cities and Chicago gave us donations that we could pack and move into the bases. And at the time of this writing, over 4 million items at an estimated value of $15.5 million have been distributed across the country. These donated goods have come from across the country from citizens who are ready to help. As we look forward, we understand the transition into communities across the U.S. will require a whole of community effort. The other witnesses have already mentioned that, and I hope this committee knows that men and women, volunteers, are ready to rally to this. Other nonprofits, veteran service organizations, coalitions have answered and are at the ready to continue this call. Incredible agencies we've had the opportunity to work with, like Ministries 25, Save the Children, Salvation Army, State VOAD, Samaritan Purse, American Red Cross, International Organization for Migration, U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Peace Corps, among the many.
De La Cruz, I'm going to ask you to summarize and conclude, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to serve. We look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. De La Cruz. I want to thank all our witnesses for your testimony. I'll remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes of question. And following up on Mr. De La Cruz's comments and Ms. Bakram, Operation Allies Welcome was a big operation. Last week I was visiting a lily pad in Qatar, trying to take in the magnitude of the mission. did a lot in very quick time, yet, as you've all mentioned, there's so much left to do. What has your experience been working with the Department of Homeland and federal partners? Ms. Bakaram, you mentioned the need for something beyond humanitarian parole, for some kind of a permanent residence. And Mr. De La Cruz, you talked about the fact that folks have some skills, and we're trying to figure out how to place those skills, how to use those skills in the U.S. And Ms. Bakaram, you mentioned that when, some people are being the language challenge, some Afghans being spoken to in Spanish. In 1960s, I had that experience. I was just sitting there because nobody spoke Spanish, so I know the feeling. But the challenge today is, how do you get somebody's attention to your issues? Do you feel you have a go-to person or agency that will address your concerns? Ms. Bakaram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have. We have reached out to Department of Homeland Security, and they arranged a session with us, a listening session where they answered a lot of our questions. Unfortunately, a day after that session, I still was in touch with the agency that had the children, and the translation service that they were using was Google Translation.
How about you, Mr. De La Cruz? Do you feel you've gotten some access to some folks that can make some decisions for you and help the process?
Sir, in our process, the coordination has been good, in particular with the federal coordinating officer and the defense coordinating officers on the base. They are serving as our primary conduit between both our volunteers, other volunteers, and the Afghan humanitarian parolees, sir.
Mr. Breen, same question.
Yeah, thank you. Our coordination has been good. I think, we would love to see a continuing effort to strengthen the interagency coordination and response here. This is a government problem. It's extremely complicated, as you mentioned, and it's going to go on for a while. So we do think it's important that we just continue to focus on that strong interagency coordination. And as you mentioned, sir, I do think it's critical that we address the legal status of these individuals as they come in, and for that, congressional action is very important. We very much need the Afghan Adjustment Act to pass.
Ms. Marco, same question.
Yes, sir. Also agree. Coordination has been good, but this is an enormous operation, and there's more that can be done.
I will now recognize our ranking member for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I want to start with Mr. Breen. Knowing, I believe actually we first met close to a decade ago when you were working with IRAP, which was then the Iraq Refugee Assistance Program, and largely focused on the Special Immigrant Visa Program. So there's kind of a full circle here. How would you assess what you are hearing and what is going on in terms of our continuing plan to evacuate at-risk Afghan allies?
Thank you. And thank you for your service in many capacities and your leadership. I would say that we've come a long way to go. There are many thousands of Afghans, as I mentioned, who are outside of the United States and have not yet reached WIPEDs. And it's critical that we not take our eye off the ball and continue to evacuate them. Many of them are at great risk. It's also important, I think, that we, as I said, grapple with the uncertain legal status that will follow if we don't deal with the consequences of humanitarian parole is the primary pathway to entry, right? It's not a pathway to permanent status. It's typically a temporary allowance to enter and remain in the United States. And as a result of that, Afghans who have been or will enter the U.S. under humanitarian parole, under Operation Allies Welcome, are going to find themselves under a cloud of legal uncertainty. The Adjustment Act would essentially allow them to have the same rights and privileges they would have had they been admitted through U.S. refugee resettlement or through the SIV program. And virtually all the Afghans arriving meet that legal definition of a refugee or qualify for the SIV program. So not doing this would, in essence, legally penalize them for having been evacuated. And it's really important that we avoid that.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. You know, having talked with a number of administration officials going back to April, I hope that the assurances we're being given that there is a plan in development that will ultimately occur are not empty ones. Mr. Dela Cruz, thank you again. It's great to have you and Team Rubicon represented here today. You know, I know firsthand what a valuable asset the veterans community has been to our country in general, but also addressing these complex emergency operations, and also recognizing that for many of Team Rubicon's volunteers and staff members, this is an intensely personal mission. That Jake Wood, co-founder of Team Rubicon, Afghanistan veteran. You know, but first, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit more about how you and other veterans working with Team Rubicon have experienced the last few months and how that has impacted your efforts here.
Yeah, so obviously, like the veteran community, Team Rubicon is as diverse as the members of this nation. So I think the way that people addressed it and the feelings they had with respect to the withdrawal, you know, they were across the board. The one common thing I can say from the veteran community is there was a common bond and this understanding that we had to welcome our allies back. That bond, that standing shoulder to shoulder on the dirt of Afghanistan could not be broken. And they understood that they could play a role. They activated to try to make the resettlement process as smooth as possible and contribute to the best of their ability, leveraging their skills, experience, and oftentimes a deeply personal connection.
Thank you. And do you feel it's important for the federal government to continue to engage, especially with veteran service organizations, regarding the ongoing resettlement efforts? And if so, what's the best way that our government can accomplish that?
I believe veterans should be considered an asset in this moment, and we should continue to find opportunities where we can apply those skills, that experience, the adaptability that can, in these times, again, as it's been mentioned by others, of ambiguity and a requirement to come to solutions. I believe veterans partnered with the civilian community can have immense impact.
Thank you. And in your written testimony, you mentioned that Team Rubicon's working to set up housing units for families as they move from bases and into welcoming communities. And you also anticipate this occurring more frequently as the process continues, as I think many of us do. You know, we've heard directly from several organizations involved in those efforts that housing will be one of the biggest challenges. Can you provide some more detail on what you're doing to assist with housing capacity issues, what challenges you are facing, and what you think the government should be doing specifically in that area to help?
Representative Meyer, we aren't specifically involved in generating the housing. We are simply helping to provide the furniture, assembling, making sure the housing is ready to welcome the families. So I'm unfortunately unable to comment on that, sir.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Border Security, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Barragan, for 5 minutes of questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for everybody on the panel. As our Afghan allies seek to make a new life here in America, there will undoubtedly be challenges in navigating our complicated legal and asylum systems. Can you describe the importance of legal services to Afghan evacuees arriving on military bases? Anybody want to go first?
I'm happy to briefly address that. It's in a word, it's critical. It's absolutely crucial that they have access to legal advice. Our immigration system, as you well know, ma'am, is complicated on the best of days, and that the legal status and the situation that the Afghans who've been evacuated are facing is even more complicated. Again, I think Congress has the opportunity to alleviate that to some great extent with the Afghan Adjustment Act. But access to counsel is critical. We stood up Project Afghan Legal Assistance to meet precisely that need. There's been an overwhelming desire on the part of the American legal profession to meet that need and step forward through us and through many of our partners and allies. So that capacity is there, but ensuring access to counsel is absolutely critical. This is a situation in which it can make a life or death difference. And we're facing a lot of these families are facing legal situations that are not their doing. They had to destroy their documents in order to prevent themselves from being targeted by the Taliban at a checkpoint. Their documents were destroyed by the U.S. Embassy during the withdrawal from Kabul, and so on. So these are complicated legal challenges that they face, and access to counsel is absolutely crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on it?
I agree. It's completely very critical that all the Afghans have access to legal counseling as well as the pathway to legal permanent residency.
Great.
I want to comment on this because for people who are inside the base, I think it's important that the process should start, especially majority of them were on humanitarian visas. They need to change status, and some of them who will be applying for asylum, they are losing time while they are in the base and do not have legal assistance. So I think that's something that we have to think about. They only have 1 year to apply for asylum, and some of them already been there over 2 months.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll move on to my next question. Sadly, we know that many of the Afghan families and individuals who have come to the U.S. have suffered significant trauma along the way, and they are now facing the prospect of building a new home in a country with a different language and different customs. This is for witness Marcos. Can you describe the access that Afghan families have to mental health services upon arriving to the United States? And are there mental health services available for children as well?
Thank you. There are efforts underway to stand up across all safe havens services for both adults and children. At the final destinations, resettlement agencies will work hard with the community, including Afghans in the community, to provide appropriate psychosocial services during the resettlement process.
Thank you. For our witness, Ms. Bahram, how can these mental health services be improved? And can you talk about how important it is that these services continue once evacuees leave military bases and resettle in communities?
I think the past few weeks have been such a difficult time, not only for Afghans who are coming through evacuation, but Afghans all around the world. And we have seen that when we serve the immigrant community here, how much is the need for providing that service. I think what we need to do right now is to recruit as many of Afghan mental health professionals as possible, because majority of the community who we will be dealing with will not be speaking the languages that we have. And having a translator or interpreter in those sessions make it difficult especially for women to be speaking about the issues that she's going through. So we as an organization have been training all our staff on mental health first, but we are also in the process of hiring an Afghan mental health provider so that we have a staff and ready to meet the need.
Well, thank you. And I just want to thank you all for the work that you do. I think we as Americans need to come together to welcome everybody with open arms and not let the immigration issue become a wedge issue, and certainly not those that have fled Afghanistan and are here in America now, to welcome them with open arms. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairperson Barragan. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Border Security, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dela Cruz, we're going to be moving fast here, good sir. Thank you for your service and for being here today. Afghan refugees, as reported, are leaving military bases before official resettlement administered by the United States government. Team Rubicon and other nonprofits here today, other NGOs, are providing intensive care for Afghan refugees, like transportation, temporary housing, food, medical screening, religious accommodation, other mechanisms to ease the process of resettlement. Given all that assistance, what incentive do Afghan refugees have to voluntarily leave U.S. military bases with no resources or direction, forfeiting the assistance from nonprofits like yours before official resettlement? Give us your opinion on that, sir.
Sir, our involvement has been limited to the management of distribution and collection of donated goods. So unfortunately, I cannot comment on your question. I can tell you that.
So from your, I was kind of asking for your opinion. an inside view, but you're just not knowledgeable enough about this particular question to comment on that?
Sir, yeah, I don't have the insight or the observations to be able to answer that question, sir.
Okay, well, then the odds go down that you can answer this one. I had what's your, when refugees are resettled into a given community, is the local government involved, and do they have any voice in the resettlement? Do you have an opinion or a view on that?
Sir, from what I've observed over the course of the resettlement, and this is primarily through interactions with different agencies in their local communities, as well as the VOADs, the volunteer organizations assisting in disaster, and the communities themselves, I do believe they have a say in the resettlement of the Afghans. And what I have seen primarily has been, how do we begin to set the conditions for them to have and enjoy a smooth resettlement into those specific communities?
So if I'm receiving reports from local government elected officials like mayors and sheriffs, that they have no advanced knowledge of resettlement operations until they show up, that should be I should look further into that as to the validity of those claims. You think that those entities are well advised and properly advised, as they should be? If we're bringing refugees into their community, the local elected officials should certainly be involved and aware. You feel like we should look deeper into that? Let me just move on, because we will look deeper into that. I'd like to comment, sir, if you can. A confidential informant has advised me, he's a civilian employee with direct interaction with Afghans inside Fort McCoy. He's advised that although refugees are divided into living quarters by various factors, and that those that have been identified with disease are segregated, that he advised that the military guards there do not restrict the movement, which is common, and from the diseased quarters. Are you familiar with that?
Sir, I am not familiar with that.
Okay, we'll look into that as well. That informant also advised me that the Afghan refugees are free to leave, but that if they leave, they cannot return to the base. Are you familiar with that?
I am not familiar with that, sir.
We shall investigate that as well. Finally, I'm being told that one of the motives that would cause them to stay in the base is that they're collecting a daily or weekly cash stipend, that they're actually amassing wealth. Are you aware of, have you observed, you heard rumors of, or seen, or have verification of payments being given to Afghan refugees on the base?
Sir, I have no awareness of that in our scope of managing and distributing donated goods.
Okay, thank you for your candor. Mr. Chairman, I respectfully and officially request that we dive deeper into some of these questions. As you can see, even solid Americans that are inside these resettlement operations operating are not aware of some of the things that are being reported that are going on. So we have an obligation to look into it. I trust your leadership and that of my chairwoman. I look forward to further hearings on this matter, because the American people deserve to know. Thank you all, and Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins, and thank you for bringing up those issues to our attention. And now, the chair will now recognize other members for questioning that they may ask the witnesses. In accordance with the guidelines laid out by the chairman and the ranking member in the February 3rd colloquy, I will recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority, and alternating between the two subcommittees. Members are also reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for questioning. And the chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman, Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair and the ranking members for having this untimely hearing. Afghan evacuees are temporarily housed at 8 military bases before relocating to communities throughout the United States. During this period, the resettlement agencies are providing critical support services while the evacuees undergo immigration processing and receive vaccinations. Robin Dunn Marcos. Ms. Marcos, what services do resettlement agencies provide to Afghan evacuees on the military basis, and how do these services differ from the ones offered by federal agencies?
Thank you. So on the bases, there are a number of different organizations that are working together to provide services. Incoming parolees receive COVID tests, they receive medical examinations, they receive the full complement of vaccines that are required, as well as other processing. The bulk of services to support the Afghan parolees will be at final destination with resettlement agencies, where they will provide housing. They will continue any type of psychosocial service, healthcare, register the children in school, cultural orientations, employment orientation and intake, and really the goal is to help them become economically and socially self-sufficient as quickly as possible. Also, English language classes. There's a whole array of services.
Are any of them anti-vax? Or they don't have the choice, do they?
I don't believe they have the choice, sir.
Interesting. Mr. Breen, how are the government and resettlement agencies soliciting feedback to improve operations on the military bases? What has been done in response to feedback?
Thank you, sir. I would defer to my colleagues who are more active on the bases with respect to that question. I think with respect to the larger evacuation, the coordination has been good, but as been mentioned in this hearing, we would like to see much stronger interagency coordination, cooperation to ensure that we continue to evacuate those at risk who have not yet reached a lily pad, who are still in Afghanistan or who are in a third country. That is many thousands of individuals, and it's critical that we continue that evacuation effort. We have yet to see, what I would say is a robust plan to continue to do that from the administration. And I think it's critical that we all continue to call out for that.
Thank you. And Ms. Barra, what are your thoughts on the engagement efforts? And how can the government and resettlement agencies best solicit feedback from Afghan evacuees in terms of their needs while on the military base?
Thank you, sir. I think yesterday I visited, as I mentioned, one of the bases, and I talked to a few Afghans there. The worry that they had that there were a lot of unknowns. They do not know how long they are there, how long they will be there, in what state they will be resettled. So I think with resettlement agencies and the federal government, I think one of the things that can be discussed is that uncertainty and unclarity about their future. I think there, as I mentioned earlier in my statement, there is a lot of expertise among Afghans, both people who have been evacuated, but Afghan American diaspora here, and that can be tagged and be of use. And I think that will be very beneficiary for the federal government as well as for the refugees who are arriving, who just arrived.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Correa has gone to vote. Votes have been called. So I will be taking
Madam
over
Chair.
while he is out to vote. Next, the chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Ms. Batagon. And I appreciate the humanitarian concerns expressed well by the witnesses. I acknowledge that there's a massive scope of humanitarian disaster created by the president's mishandling of the evacuation. The testimony of the witnesses, I think, is helpful to depict the extent of the burdens on Afghans and Americans alike through that. But I note that it's pretty difficult to fit this subject matter, frankly, into our committee's jurisdiction. After all, this is the Committee on Homeland Security, and of course, one of the committees is border security and facilitation. The other of oversight. But again, the security of the homeland is the first obligation of this committee. And I want to make sure that the witnesses are here could correct me or help me understand whether I'm right or wrong. I understand, I think the Hill has said about a month ago that there are 124,000 roughly evacuated by the U.S. from Afghanistan. About 6,000 of those are U.S. citizens, 3%, so that'd be on the order of 3,700, 4,000 are Afghan SIVs. 6% are lawful permanent residents. That'd be about 7,500 roughly. So that leaves about 100,000. And I understand, as the chairman Correa mentioned, lily pad countries, they're basically possible parolees, about 100,000. Someone said, I think in the course of the testimony, about 60,000 so far in the United States. I believe that was the number I heard, but someone can correct me on that as well. That are being initially vetted, the remainder in the lily pad countries, and then at least according to Mr. Breen's testimony, I guess they're all bound to come to the United States, or that's the suggestion. I was doing some reading. There's a joint Department of State, Department of Homeland Security report on the Afghan SIV process back in April that explained that required processing is the administrative processing, security fraud, and criminal background checks involves rigorous background checks, which are essential to the integrity of the SIV program and U.S. national security, and may take anywhere from less than 30 days to over a year, depending on the applicant's background. And there's also a special tool that was implemented after 2001, the Security Advisory Opinion, which it provides enhanced scrutiny of certain potentially higher risk nationalities and demographics. And so I guess the question for anybody who's inclined to take it up is who can speak to the question how security of the homeland can be fully protected while the Biden administration is paroling Afghans from the same refugee and SIV population whose vetting historically took months and even years within a matter of days or weeks. Is anybody in position to speak to that? So hearing none, let me ask Mr. Breen if he'd at least see if he could correct me on facts in terms of what my understanding is. Are we talking about 100,000 potential parolees? And if so, you spoke about our moral obligation, but if they're not eligible for the SIV program, doesn't that mean they didn't serve along with American troops? And if so, what's our moral obligation there in your view, and what's the basis for your view about that?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. The latest information I have, and again, I'm not a government official, but the latest information I have is that of those evacuated, about 85% are Afghans who would be eligible for a special immigrant visa, P1 or P2 refugee status, or their family members. About additional information is about 40% of those you're speaking of are children. And so the vast majority of those evacuated, just on the face of it, would qualify for these programs. I think the concern around humanitarian parole is, it's a legal mechanism, of course, that allows you to enter the United States in a moment of great need. But what it does not do is confer upon you any assurance that you can remain in the United States. And so what we are likely to see, unless there's an adjustment act, is all these folks will have to find some other channel within existing immigration law in order to not overstay that parole. That probably will lead to a large number of affirmative asylum applications or cases. As you know, sir, I would assume that the asylum system, we currently have a 400,000 case backlog in the existing asylum system. And so I don't think it's in anybody's interest to see all those affirmative asylum cases added to that backlog. There are also a number of other legal issues that may arise related to extortion by the Taliban, forced cooperation with the Taliban. It's one interpretation of existing U.S. law would bar someone from entering if they've been forced at gunpoint to feed a member of the Taliban. And so
Mr. Breen,
the legal.
I'm gonna interject here because votes are happening and members are waiting to ask their questions and the gentleman's time has expired. So I am going to now recognize, the chair recognizes for 5 minutes, the gentlewoman, Representative Titus from Nevada.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for that courtesy. You were talking about the backlog with the permanent asylum. If you're looking at Las Vegas or Nevada, the closest court is Southern California. That takes a lot of time, a lot of resources for people to get down there. Could you comment on the possibility of using mobile courts to address some of this backlog? Anybody? No? Well, that seems like it would be a good idea to help people fill out the paperwork and hold court in places other than where they're formally established now if we want to get through with a backlog. So I guess I'll answer my own question. How about the possibility of using private sponsorships like they do in Canada? Because our states and many states have different programs. We've got something called a Wilson Fish program. In Nevada, we have to depend on Catholic charities. Fortunately, we have an office for new Americans. It's helpful, but it's not actually done in the executive department. Would that be something that we could use? Seems to me we got to think outside the box to deal with this problem.
First, I could certainly agree with the thinking outside the box. I think the most critical intervention that I would recommend would be creating a categorical parole program for Afghan nationals. And that would prioritize and expedite for thousands of humanitarian parole requests that have been filed versus having to file them, one at a time. And bringing that along with a fee waiver, I think would be very effective.
Anybody else?
The use of co-sponsorship and private sponsorship, we absolutely agree should be used in the resettlement of Afghans, as well as other refugees, excuse me.
What about the mobile asylum court?
Sorry, ma'am, I can't speak to that.
Well, was an article in the paper about an audit that's being done of the State Department to look at the special visa program and some of this resettlement. I wonder how much one hand knows what the other hand's doing. Do you know, or can you comment on State Department versus Homeland Security, what those problems are? In addition to federal versus state and local and private?
Ma'am, there's a complicated immigration law problem that is waiting for us if there is not an Adjustment Act passed. And so I think, to your point about mobile courts and other things, we are all for and have advocated strongly for methods that would clear the asylum backlog of 400,000. I mean, that in itself is a problem worthy of congressional attention, to put it mildly. But in this case, I think that the best move we could make respectfully would be to avoid adding additional cases, affirmative claims, to that asylum backlog by passing the Adjustment Act. And that would allow Afghans who've been evacuated to have a very clear path, assuming they meet the requirements, toward permanent residency in the United States, which is the objective that I think we all share.
Any comment about the cooperation or the audit for the State Department, or how it affects what Homeland Security or what y'all are doing? Well, okay, thank you. I'll yield back. That was useless.
Thank you, Representative Titus. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Harshberger.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I do have a couple of questions. I thank the witnesses for being here today. I guess my question is this, and either one of you can answer this, and it may be different in every case, but what was the vetting process? What did your vetting process did your organization have to go through to get the, I guess, is it a contract that you got with the government in order to go ahead and process these Afghanis for Operation Allies Welcome? What kind of process did you have to go through? And was it a contract that you were awarded to do this?
Ma'am, I would just simply say we are not a government contractor. We provide the services and the legal assistance that we provide on a volunteer basis and a pro bono basis. So we're an independent organization.
So you're an independent, of course, but so how did you, I mean, how did they choose you to do this? I guess is my question. Did you offer up your organization, or how did they end up using all four of your organizations to do this operation? And anybody can start.
This is Nahid. We do not have any contract with the government. As a social service organization and woman right organization, we feel it's our duty to provide the services. And as I mentioned, there is no contracts with the government or no funding from the federal government for this project. We have been receiving private funding and foundation money that we have been using that towards the resettlement work that we have been doing. I also really appreciate if people will call the people from Afghanistan as Afghan, not Afghani, because Afghani is the currency of the country. Thank you.
Yes. Well, as a follow-up to that, when you're successful in your efforts of resettling a refugee in the United States, I guess my question is, what are you doing to make sure that he or she is successfully acclimated and assimilated as a member of their new community? And another, even to that, how do you determine, or who determines where these refugees will take refuge, what state? Because we were on a briefing and I asked the briefer, because 421 or 451 were located in Tennessee, and I knew the breakdown, and I got that 2 minutes before the briefing on which parts of the state that those refugees were placed. I guess my question is, do you have any input on that? But how do you follow them up, and what kind of outcomes do you use to measure how they're being assimilated, or do you do that? And that's anybody.
There are 9 nonprofit organizations that have cooperative agreements with the Department of State to enter into a public-private partnership on the resettlement of refugees. And within that program, there are certain measures that all of the resettlement agencies must abide by. The 9 national resettlement agencies have a network across the country of over 200 offices. And so that is the network that is initially resettling the parolees. It was kind of fit right into that established infrastructure. In terms of how we measure.
Thank you so much. Can we have everybody mute, please? Thank you. I apologize. Go ahead.
As I mentioned, the goal of the resettlement program is to assist refugees to become economically and socially self-sufficient as quickly as possible after arrival. IRC, like many other resettlement agencies, offer a number of services, both through federal, state, local, and private funding through citizenship. And each one of those have different outcomes that we track. But this is certainly something that we do.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just interested. I don't know how the process works when you volunteer as an organization to do that, or how the government allows different organizations to go about that. And just making sure that you can measure the outcomes to make sure these citizens are assimilated. That's very important. And I'll look further into that, and any information you can forward to us would be advantageous for myself, at least. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Well, thank you for that. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, if you are prepared. Ms. Jackson Lee, I think you are on mute, maybe. Yes. Okay, I think maybe she's not ready. I know there's votes happening. What I'm going to do here is I am going to recess so the chair can return. Ms. Jackson Lee, are you prepared to ask your questions?
No, I'd like you to get at, I'm walking on the floor to vote,
Okay.
so I'd like
Okay.
to come, but I do want to ask questions, so I'd like to have you come back to me. Thank you.
Thank you. So what we'll do is I have to run to votes and the chair's not back yet. We're going to recess, hopefully just for a few minutes until the chair gets back to resume the hearing. If our witnesses could just, hold tight as we recess very shortly. We have members that want to ask questions and we do expect the chair to come back very shortly. With that, we will stand in recess. Thank you.
unrecess. We will again come to order. A next member, Mr. Clyde, will now be recognized for 5 minutes of questioning. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like the rest of the world, I was horrified to see the dire humanitarian crisis unfold throughout Afghanistan in August. The circumstances leading to this tragedy were completely unavoidable and were a direct result of a leadership void in the Biden administration. This administration must learn from these failures, and so they do not repeat these mistakes in the future. Furthermore, we must ensure that the mechanisms we have in place to vet individuals coming from Afghanistan are sufficient and prioritize the safety and security of our citizens and of our nation. Although the heartbreaking images from Hamid Karzai International Airport will forever be ingrained in our country's conscience, I'm encouraged by the fact that many Americans, both at home and abroad, have stepped up to the plate to help their fellow men in time of need. The testimonies provided by each of the witnesses today prove that, and I thank you. So my first question is for Ms. Bahram. I'm not sure if you saw the heartbreaking article in the Wall Street Journal this weekend about a mother who is being coerced to hand over her 3-year-old daughter to a man who lent her money so she could survive the aftermath of the humanitarian crisis. It's reported that the loan resulted in an insurmountable debt load that she could not bear. It was $550. And he demanded payment. The article goes on to discuss the dire conditions in Afghanistan, including a UN report that states 95% of Afghans are suffering from malnutrition leading into the winter months. And I understand that your organization is the largest women's organization in Afghanistan, with over 850 local Afghan staff working tirelessly to provide support services to women, children, and families. So my question is, how has your staff in the United States and in Afghanistan been affected by the withdrawal, and what steps are you having to take to assist staff and clients in Afghanistan?
Thank you, sir. As mentioned, we have over 1,200 staff in Afghanistan. Majority of them are at high risk because they are women rights and human rights defenders. And majority of them work with families who were, with women who were survivors of domestic violence or underage marriages or forced marriages, and fight Taliban in order to get the woman to safety. So our staff in Afghanistan obviously have been under a lot of risk, and we unfortunately were unable to evacuate any of them during the evacuation period. It has affected us personally, professionally. I have had losses during the war in Afghanistan. From the day I was born till now, I haven't seen a day of peace. But the past few weeks have been the darkest days of my life. I'm sorry. Knowing people do not have a simple food to eat, having a simple dinner on my dining table has been very difficult.
I'm sorry.
Knowing people do not have access into their bank account, and I being able to get my paycheck has been very difficult. Knowing people have been separated from their children at the airport, and hundreds of killed at that explosion, many bodies not recovered, one that I know personally, has been very difficult to live with my family. So I think it's a time for us to understand the importance of humanitarian aids for Afghanistan, and knowing that we should not let the people suffer anymore. As an Afghan American, I feel as an American, we are responsible and we owe them. Because the past 20 years, there have been a lot of achievements, not only for women's rights, but throughout the country. And having now kids 12 years and older sitting at home and not being able to go to school is our failure.
Yeah, so everything that has been achieved, or much that has been achieved, I just see us losing that. And it is indeed a very, very terrible humanitarian crisis. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask to submit the following article titled, "As Afghanistan Sinks into Destitution, Some Sell Children to Survive," for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I see my time has expired. I have one more question, if you will allow me.
If it's a quick one, go ahead, sir.
All right. For Ms. Marco, according to the International Rescue Committee's website, your organization has helped resettle more than 16,000 SIVs since 2006. So you obviously have seen the extent of the paperwork and the burdensome regulations that have hindered our allies' ability to have their SIV applications processed in a timely manner. So in an attempt to reduce some of this red tape, the House passed the Bipartisan Allies Act of 2021, yet this bill has not passed the Senate, and the problems associated with the CIV process have reared their ugly head during the evacuation process in Afghanistan. Our nation ended up leaving thousands of people who supported our coalition's mission in Afghanistan while evacuating many who did not. Those left behind now are being targeted by the Taliban. Can you provide the committee with your thoughts, very, very briefly, on how Congress could better improve the CIV program and better support our future allies who have risked all to help us achieve our strategic goals?
Thank you. In my testimony, I did offer correcting the P2 program, expanding it to make it eligible for more folks that do not qualify for the time limits under the SIV. But all the programs could be made more streamlined to get more people timely relief.
Thank you very much. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Clyde. Ms. Jackson Lee for 5 minutes. Questions? Ms. Lee? Looks like everybody's busy voting, doing something. A very busy place. So I will make some comments and maybe entertain chairman of the committee hearing. And my thoughts were just drawing a parallel again to the Vietnam experience. A couple of things come to mind. Number one, how important it is the Afghan community, Afghan immigrant community, and their contribution to this country, how valuable I anticipate they will be to make sure that people understand who the community is and that you've come in to help us at a time when we do need employees and workers in this country. And second of all, just to make sure that your contributions and your history is not forgotten, I would ask you to think about creating a program like Writing on America. Let me explain to you. In the Vietnamese community, there's an organization that every year has competitions on essays by refugees to tell their story, to tell their trials and tribulations as they came to America. And then those essays, essentially the top ones, are essentially compiled and published in a book for generations to come. I think it's important that the Afghan community do the same thing for a couple of reasons. Number one, lessons learned for Americans. And number two, for the legacy that your children will inherit. They need to know the experience that you've gone through. They need to know the history. so they can better understand who they are in the context of being American. So I would ask you as a suggestion to think about doing that. And finally, in terms of our work on this committee, I started out by asking you if you had a go-to person, a go-to in the government. It sounds,
I'm on, Mr. Chairman. Sorry.
it sounds, okay. Ms. Jackson, give me 2 seconds here to finish my sentence. It's important
No
that,
problem.
you have immediate answers to your concerns. I think addressing the issues from getting a green card to getting a response to your needs is essential for full integration, immediate integration into the greater part of America. So I would ask you to think about that. If you have any questions, like my colleagues have said, our offices are here to help, and we've been helping answer a lot of the questions from the community in the last few weeks. With that being said, I'm going to introduce, or I should say recognize, Ms. Jackson Lee for 5 minutes of questions. Ms. Lee, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. I was only trying to let you know that I had wheezed my way back in, or wormed my way back into the session that I had been on. It seems like I'm on a double screen, but in any event, let me thank the witnesses and the chairman, the two chairman and ranking members for this very important hearing. Let me also thank Mr. Breen, Ms. Marcos, and as well Ms. Brahman, and certainly Art de la Cruz. I've heard all of your testimony. It is moving. All of us were called by our constituents to help Afghans who had helped us. I want to pay tribute to retired Navy Commander Lisa Tonar. We were on late night calls 2 and 3 in the morning to help families in particular that were interpreters and were trying to get out. One was able to get out before the United States left Afghanistan, but we were left with an interpreter who had a family of 9, including 9 children, more than a family of 9. In any event, and in addition, we had my constituent Miriam, who's a doctor. They were stranded and had to make their way near the Uzbekistan border. The good news was that the doctor was in fact, able to have her family take care of those as they just stood by the Uzbekistan border. Ultimately, they were transferred to the United Arab Emirates, where they stay. And so here are my concerns. First of all, I've heard your concerns about food, and I assure you, as a founder and co-chair of the Afghan caucus since the Afghan war, a bipartisan caucus, having gone to Afghanistan many, many times, we will again assert our concern about these issues to be able to be collaborative and helpful. But I want to raise the question, I want Miriam to get out. She's in the United Arab Emirates, along with the other interpreter and his family with so many children. And we have not been able to be out. They're in the UAE's humanitarian city, awaiting admittance into the United States. Whoever will answer it, one, would it be helpful if we took an inventory of where Afghans who are waiting to come to the United States are, those that are not on American soil? We need to know where they are. They're in Afghanistan. I heard the tragedies of what happened. Miriam, this young doctor, had the same thing. She had to escort some women out of a hotel while the Taliban was searching in other rooms. It has been a nightmare. But I will say to you that I believe that democracy has been planted. It is a seed in the hearts of the Afghan people. And I do believe that we're going to see democracy take hold and overcome those who are despots and govern them now. But I do want to know whether an inventory would be helpful and whether we should raise that with all of the departments from DHS to state. The other is anyone wants to comment on those that are being still stationed, if you will, in United Arab Emirates and humanitarian city, and any thoughts on how Congress can help to facilitate them getting back into the United States. I understand they're more than. And then lastly, anyone want to comment about the best way to ensure that adequate food is at the variety of facilities? I'll yield to anyone. There are 3 questions that I asked: the inventory, getting out of the UAE, and food distribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Those are outstanding questions so much. Thank you for raising them. Very briefly, there are many thousands of families in the situation you described all over the world. In Afghanistan and hiding, in neighboring countries, in UAE and in the Gulf. that inventory would be extremely helpful. We in the NGO community are doing our very best to track all of these families. And we need a whole of government plan to move those folks to the United States. Many of us have recommended humanitarian parole on a categorical basis with fee waivers that would allow that to happen relatively quickly. Combined with an adjustment act that would meet the following requirements for those individuals once they reach the United States. I think that's a critical need, and thank you so much for raising it. About the tens of thousands of people who have yet to be evacuated at this moment running for their lives.
We'll be in touch. Thank you so much. Ms. Brahman, I feel your emotion and pain. Do you want to talk about trying to help those with food and other needs? Ms. Brahman? Barham? I'm sorry, Barham?
Our staff in Afghanistan also work with UNHCR with displaced, internal displaced people, and the conditions are not good. We also, as I mentioned earlier, that not being able to access money or send money, many of the staff are not able to take their paychecks from their bank account. And that has been challenging. As an organization, we have been searching for answers and looking and reaching out to people to find out a way to do that, but unfortunately have been unsuccessful.
Should we reach out to the UAE and the State Department to at least those who are there to try and get them moving toward coming to the United States?
We definitely should, yes. I just heard that Pakistan will reopen its border as of tomorrow with Afghanistan. So hopefully that will make it a little bit easier for aids to go inside Afghanistan.
Very good. Well, let me thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see a number of individuals that I'll be reaching out to. The Afghan caucus stands ready to work on a number of these issues. I know with a number of our other committees, these are two very important subcommittees, and this is a very important hearing. Thank you to both chairman and ranking member for allowing me to participate today, and your courtesies extended. Thank you again. We must solve this. These are people who've served on the front lines for us. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson Lee, and I want to also echo Ms. Lee's comments about counting on our support in addressing some of these issues. We recognize our Afghan allies. We recognize the suffering of the people in Afghanistan, and are here to try to help as much as we can to make sure that these issues are not forgotten and that you're relegated to a memory somewhere. Let's work together to make sure we address these issues. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to call on Mr. Langevin for 5 minutes of questions. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank both chairs and ranking members for allowing me to participate in today's hearing. And I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony. So some of the testimony from today's witnesses reflects concerns I share about backlogs in processing humanitarian parolee applications. USCIS recently reported to my staff that they were adjudicating 14,000 humanitarian parolee applications with just 6 of their officers. I want to say that again, 14,000 humanitarian parolee applications with just 6 officers. That is completely and utterly unacceptable, and I call upon USCIS to address this shortcoming immediately. I'm similarly concerned about possible backlogs forming at other points in the resettlement process as other government installations face surges in demand for their services. So I'm thinking, for example, of a surge in demand for driver's licenses, which could cause backlogs at, say, for example, departments of motor vehicles and complicate the resettlement process for many Afghans. So aside from the humanitarian parolee process, are you seeing other choke points where Afghan refugees face significant backlogs in applications for critical documents and services? And based on your experience, do agencies providing critical documents and services have adequate linguistic and cultural competencies to account for the large number of Afghan refugees they will be serving? And are there opportunities for Congress to help alleviate these issues, for example, by providing resources necessary to hire additional staff? This is for all the witnesses, if you could answer that, just address those questions.
I think there is definitely a need of more staff in USCIS. There has been definitely a backlog, and we have applied for many of people with humanitarian parolees, and not have gotten any approved yet. There is also another issue with that for people who left Afghanistan and are in the third country. None of the countries are processing Afghan humanitarian visas. So if folks got out through charters and were able to be, for example, in Pakistan, Islamabad, the US Embassy in Islamabad are not being processing any Afghan visas. So the challenge outside as well as inside have been the same. So.
Other witnesses, if you care to comment, again, particularly, you see other choke points and backlogs that we need to address?
Thank you, Congressman. I think you hit on one of the big ones, which is humanitarian parole. Requiring individual applications versus categorical humanitarian parole with fee waivers creates a huge burden on the system. And as you say, that's under-resourced at this time. It's a huge critical need. I would just also underscore very quickly, there are many foreseeable backlogs coming unless an adjustment act is passed, primarily in the asylum system, but kind of across the immigration system. That's foreseeable. That will go on for years and place a huge burden on the whole system unless that adjustment act is passed.
We would also like for 765s, the employment authorizations to be available digitally, please.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? I had another question. Given that we're getting close to the end of October, it's an unfortunate reality that Afghan children will be missing school time as they live temporarily on U.S. bases. Will these children and their families need additional educational assistance to make up for this lost time? And what resources will be required to address that need? And is there an opportunity for Congress to assist in providing such resources? And then my last one for witness Marcos, are eligible refugees enrolling in Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, or refugee medical assistance? Are they in fact eligible? And remember, these are Afghans that helped U.S. forces in many ways save lives of U.S. troops, and providing the right resources and help is important. Are eligible refugees enrolling in Medicaid, that's the Children's Health Insurance Program, for or refugee medical assistance? And do you believe that refugees are aware of the healthcare options available to them? If not, how would Congress support efforts to increase awareness and enrollment in health care services?
I'm not well placed to answer the education question, but the resettlement agencies absolutely will be helping enroll both children and adults in healthcare benefits.
With education question, I would like to answer because we have experienced this when this start of special immigrant visa families have arrived in 2014, 2015. And many of those kids have never been to school in Afghanistan and were placed in 5th and 6th grade. So our organization had provided intensive tutoring program with an amazing group of volunteers, retired teachers, who came forward and gave extra times to make sure that these kids will be able to catch up. I think it's important for us now that we are having larger number of children out. It's important that we have to think of after-school programs that will specifically address this need.
Thank you very much. I know my time's expired. Ms. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence and for allowing me to participate. To you and the other chair, the ranking members, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Langevin. Do we have any other members that wish to ask questions of our witnesses? If not, then I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and for all our members for their questions. Before I adjourn, I want to ask for unanimous consent to submit a statement to the record from the Church World Service. Hearing no objections, so ordered. And the members of this subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses. We'll ask the witnesses to, if you do get the questions, to respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. And I also remind the members that the committee's record will remain open for 10 minutes. Without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned. Thank you very much.